Hello everyone, it's Mimi here. BMS working in the NHS. And today's video will be about the third module of the Section 2 in the IBMS digital registration portfolio called Quality. So, just a quick introduction to this video. It will be short and sweet, I promise. It will be focused on the learning outcomes, different types of evidence, and HCPC SOPs that need to be met in this module. We will discuss evidence justification and IBMS evidence suggestions. I will share with you some of my evidence ideas, and we will finish with some helpful tips to make your portfolio really good. With all that said, I hope you will enjoy the content of my video and I hope you will learn a lot. So let's dive into the third module of the second section. These are the learning outcomes you should be able to meet when you have completed this module. You should be able to recognize the value of quality control, quality assurance, and clinical governance to ensure continual improvement. You should be able to identify and respond appropriately to abnormal outcomes from quality indicators. And you should be able to accurately and precisely perform calibration and quality control checks appropriate to your role. When you complete this module, come back to the learning outcomes to see and check that you have actually met them. This is the mandatory piece of evidence. The task is, participate in a scheduled quality audit in your laboratory and review the audit outcomes to identify any impact on service and potential improvements. So to break it down, first part is asking you to participate in a scheduled quality audit in your laboratory. Departments you have their quality leads who oversee the overall quality needs and QMS. They might be able to tell you when is the next quality audit so you could participate in it. The second part of the task is asking you to review the outcomes of this audit. Audit might have a list of things that need to be checked to see if correct procedures were followed. If those procedures are not followed, this would be a finding. Audit usually identifies several findings that then need to be addresses. So your role here is to review the findings that were identified. Are they all from the same area of the lab? Are they staff, instrument or procedure related? The next part of the task is asking you to identify any impact on the service. What impact do those findings have on the service you are providing? Consider false results, reliability of results, delayed results, lost results, and so on. What impacts would those findings have on the patient? Consider or missed diagnosis, wrong or delayed treatment, and so on. And the last part of the task is asking you to identify potential improvement. What can you suggest that would prevent those findings from occurring again? Consider introduction of IQC, better training, regular equipment maintenance, and so on. This depends on what findings were identified during the audit. IBMS also offers their advice on how to approach this mandatory evidence, which I think is very good. First information you are getting is telling you to explain your role in quality audit. You could do this audit as part of your training to become an internal auditor, or you could be just shadowing, or you could be already trained and are performing audits on regular basis. Whatever your role in this, explain it well. The second part of the advice is asking you to use the original audit and produce a summary of the main findings. So what have you identified during the audit? On overall, how many findings were there? Have they occurred in the same area in the lab? What do they relate? The next part of the advice is asking you to identify any of those findings that might affect the service delivery. For example, consider the quality and safety of results generated. Could they be affected by the findings? Consider turnaround times, resources, and so on. The last part of the advice is asking you to explain how those findings will be addressed, tracked, and managed to improve service delivery. What procedures are in place in your department that address audit findings? Consider kappa equals corrective and preventive action, nonconformance, DATIX, root cause analysis, efficacy of corrective action, and so on. Then consider how they would improve service delivery. Now let's talk about the 3 SOPs that need to be met by this piece of mandatory evidence. The first standard is, engage in evidence-based practice. To meet this standard you need to engage in evidence-based practice. What is evidence-based practice? Consider decision-making approach, integration of current evidence, clinical expertise, and patient values and preferences to improve care and outcome. Consider the systemic process involving search for the best evidence, critically evaluating the evidence, integrating the evidence into practice, and eventually evaluating the outcome of it. How do you personally engage in evidence-based practice? Procedures used in your department evidence-based? Link this to your task, which is an audit. The second standard is, participate in quality management, including quality control, quality assurance, clinical governance, and the use of appropriate outcome measures. To meet this standard, you need to participate in quality management. What is quality management, quality control, quality assurance, clinical governance? What are the key aspects of quality management? Consider governance, quality control and assurance to monitor, review and evaluate service, auditing to review processes against criteria to improve quality and outcome, risk management to identify and minimize risks, outcome measures to evaluate effectiveness of interventions introduced. How can you participate in each key step of quality management? Consider your engagement in audits, using outcome measures, participate in training, managing risks, seeking feedback, and so on. Also consider the use of QC material before patient samples are tested, competence, equipment maintenance, IQC and EQA where applicable, expiry dates of solutions used, following SOPs, error reporting, professional standards, regulatory framework, relevant documentation, and so on. The list can go on and on and on when it comes to quality. And remember, it is everyone's responsibility to participate in quality management. The third standard is, recognize the value of gathering and using data for quality assurance and improvement programs. This standard needs you to recognize the value of gathering and using data for quality assurance and improvements. What is quality assurance? Why is gathering and using data for quality assurance important? Consider enabling informed decision-making, proactive evidence-based improvements, proactive issue detection, measure of effectiveness. Quantitative versus qualitative, creating a culture of learning, enabling accountability, compliance, and transparency, accuracy, traceability, timeliness, and consistency. What would happen if quality assurance was not in place? What impact would that have on a patient? Those are the three standards you have to keep in mind when writing your mandatory evidence. They should all be demonstrated. So now that we have finished with the mandatory evidence, let's have a look at the choice evidence 2 and 3, which are candidates' choice evidence and Q&A set by the trainer. They both together have to meet 8 HCPC standards. And if you download the module descriptors for the portfolio from the IBMS website, you will find some example evidence suggested by the IBMS, which is very handy. These are the HCPC standards that have to be met by those two pieces of evidence. The first standard is, gather and use feedback and information, including qualitative and quantitative data, to evaluate the responses of service users to their care. To meet this standard, you need to be able to gather and use feedback and information from the users to evaluate their responses to their care. How can you gather this information? Consider surveys, questionnaires, interviews, reviews, DATIX, complaints, anonymous options, accessible formats, and so on. How can you then use this information? Consider analyzing trends, identifying issues, planning actions, redesigning and improving service, update policies and procedures, monitor performance, closing the loop via notice boards, and so on. The second standard is, monitor and systematically evaluate the quality of practice, and maintain an effective quality management and quality assurance process working towards continual improvement. To meet this standard, you need to be able to monitor and evaluate the quality practice. You also need to be able to maintain an effective quality management assurance process that leads to continual improvement. What can be used to monitor and evaluate quality of practice? Consider IQC, EQA, accreditation, ISO standards, documentation, SOPs, training and competence, error management, audits, CAPA, nonconformance, DATIX, and so on. How do you participate in those? Why are they important? Consider ensuring safe and effective care, evidence-based and person-centered service, continual improvements, and so on. The third standard is, evaluate care plans or intervention plans using recognized and appropriate outcome measures, in conjunction with the service user where possible, and revise the plans as necessary. To meet this standard, you need to be able to evaluate and revise care plans or intervention plans by using appropriate outcome measures, with or without service users. Consider quality indicators, evidence-based measures, diagnostic accuracy, efficiency, standardization, safety, MDTs, EQAs, KPIs, and so on. Pathology plays a crucial role in development and execution of patient care plans. We provide essential diagnostic, prognostic, and therapeutic information that ultimately drives decision-making. Through the results we as BMSs generate, pathologists contribute to care plans in several ways. Consider MDTs, guiding therapy, monitoring progress of diseases, prognostic and predictive value of the results we generate. Also consider screening programs, cancer pathways, infection control, chronic disease monitoring, and how they can be revised based on pathology service. Within pathology setting, care plan can be viewed as a structured process of obtaining, analyzing, and delivering high-quality diagnostic information that enables healthcare teams to provide effective, patient-centered care. The fourth standard is, select and apply quality and process control measures. To meet this standard, you need to be able to select and apply quality and process control measures in your practice. What are the process control measures in your workplace? How do you apply quality in your daily activities? Consider use of control material, verification and validation process, calibration and maintenance of instruments, defined quality standards, standardization, variance, corrective action, continuous improvement, documentation and traceability, training and competence, IQC, EQA, KPIs, TATs, ISO standards, and so on. How do you select and apply those in your practice? The fifth standard is, identify and respond appropriately to abnormal outcomes from quality indicators. To meet this standard, you need to be able to identify abnormal outcomes and respond appropriately. What are quality indicators in your workplace? How would they identify abnormal outcomes? Consider accuracy rate, proficiency, reference ranges, control material, IQC, EQA, timelines, audits, trend analysis, process mapping, monitoring, statistics, and so on. How would abnormal outcomes look like in your department? Would you be able to identify them? What do you do when you get abnormal outcomes from quality indicators? Consider communication, investigation, root cause analysis, CAPA, DATIX, improvements, training, feedback, monitoring, and so on. The sixth standard is, work with accuracy and precision. This standard is straightforward, you need to work with accuracy and precision to meet it. What is accuracy and precision? How does it look like in your workplace? How do you measure and ensure accuracy and precision in your practice? Consider sensitivity and specificity of tests, control material, IQC, EQA, SOPs, maintenance and calibration of equipment, training and competence, standardization, and so on. The seventh standard is, perform calibration and quality control checks. Another one that is straightforward. To meet it, you need to perform calibration and quality control checks. What calibration and quality control checks are performed in your laboratory and why? Do you understand them and can you perform them? What would you do if they failed? Consider equipment adjustment, use of reference or control material, traceable standards to ensure accuracy, monitoring performance, validation and verification process, documentation, traceability, frequency of procedures, and so on. You can use specific examples when you are calibrating and when you perform quality control checks in your practice. The eighth standard is, formulate specific and appropriate management plans including the setting of timescales. To meet this standard, you need to be able to formulate specific and appropriate management plans and include in them relevant timescale. Let's look at it from the quality point of view as it is in the quality module. What specific quality management plans can you formulate? Consider assessment, goal setting, action planning, roles and responsibilities, quality indicators, resources available, costs. Include setting up the timescale by immediate actions, follow-up, intermediate milestones and deadline for completion. Relate it to your practice, either it or a procedure. Always have those 8 standards in your mind when you are selecting a piece of evidence and then when you are writing it. Remember, all those 8 standards need to be demonstrated in 2 pieces of evidence you choose. One more thing you have to include when choosing and writing your evidence. And that is the evidence justification. For the mandatory piece of evidence, the IBMS has provided a very good justification why they would want you to do that piece of evidence. I would strongly advise you to read their justifications, as this can form the basis for how to be justifying your choice of evidence. You should also include what standards you have met by your evidence. Think about what type of evidence you have chosen, then think why you have chosen that particular evidence, and think which standards you are meeting with that evidence as well. These are some suggestions from the IBMS that could be used as the choice evidence in this section. They are pretty good and can meet several standards, which is what you need. And these are types of evidence ideas I would also suggest. Again, they can meet several standards as well, which is the goal. Some more evidence ideas you could consider. I would also like to share with you some helpful tips that can make your portfolio look really good. Try to present the information in various formats such as tables, pictures, photographs, diagrams, flowcharts, graphs, or even videos, if you can. This nicely breaks down a lot of text that is usually present in specialist portfolios. Try to make it a little bit more interesting to the reader, which will be your training officer and eventually the verifier. Try to put yourself in their shoes. How would you like to read hundreds of pages of plain text? There is a saying I really like, and it goes like this: a picture is worth 1,000 words. I will make a video where I will share with you my evidence I used for my portfolio back in the day. Hopefully that will help as well. Also try to use various types of evidence, not just one type, like case studies, for each subsection. You could use experiments, case studies, annotated results, annotated photographs of you performing tasks, evidence of troubleshooting, annotated EQA results, nonconformances, validation and verification evidence, comparisons of different approaches and their pros and cons, control material production, certificates of course attendance with reflective statements, annotated images or charts, and so on. Try to bring in your personality. Think about the ways you like to learn best. If you like experimenting, perform experiment. If you like troubleshooting, perform troubleshooting. Choose something that demonstrates your understanding, knowledge, skills, and how you apply this in your practice. And one more thing, keep the competence requirements in mind when you selecting your evidence. Good evidence will tick off several requirements. And this brings me to the end of today's video. Hopefully you now have a better understanding about the standards that are within this section and how to meet those standards with relevant evidence. And my final take-home message? Keep those standards in mind when selecting and approaching your evidence. Bye for now.